We've all played a Mario game at some point, and maybe you've stopped to ask, are these jumps even humanly possible? Or maybe you haven't actually thought that and you don't give a shit. But either way, you're going to be sitting down with me, we're going to measure Mario's jumping strength throughout his 2D career, and you'll even pick up a bunch of physics knowledge along the way. Sounds good? Let's quickly revise a whole bunch of physics. We will be discussing jumps, which are pretty much one-dimensional movements. Hold up, one dimension? Unless you're a fucking line, you're probably wondering what that means. To us, it looks like we live in 3 dimensions. You can move forward and backward, left and right, and up and down. There's probably like 11 dimensions in reality, but that's wizardry shit and we don't have time for that. A lot of games are 2D, like our little Mario guy here. Mario can move left and right, and he can also jump up and down, but he can't launch himself into the background. Poor fucking bitch, no third dimension for you. But when we're just jumping, we only need the up and down, so we only need one dimension. In a single dimension, we will call x the distance. So if x is 0, we are on the ground. If x is 5, we are in the air. And if x is -10, we're suffocating in the fucking ground. Next, we introduce velocity, which tells us something about how this x position is changing over time. If you're moving up, meaning x is increasing, the velocity will be positive. If we're about to slam into the ground and die, x is decreasing and the velocity is negative. But there's more. Take a good look at Mario when he's jumping. Does it look like the velocity just jumps from positive to negative at the top? No, it fucking doesn't, otherwise our Italian plumber would jump like he's in a shitty PowerPoint presentation. The movement is smooth. He slows down near the top of his jump, then starts going faster again until he hits the ground. In other words, the velocity itself is also changing dynamically. It starts high when Mr. Mario jumps, then keeps decreasing at a constant pace until it is 0 at the top, meaning Mario is not moving up or down. And then Mario starts falling down, so the velocity keeps getting smaller, this time more and more negative, so he moves faster again, but this time down instead of up. The rate at which the velocity changes over time is called the acceleration. If Mario jumps, gravity counteracts his movements and makes his velocity decrease, eventually making him fall down again. This is because gravity causes a negative acceleration. Finally, we can define velocity and acceleration as derivatives of the position with respect to time. So velocity is the derivative of the position x, and acceleration is the derivative of the velocity. Got it? Let's look into the physics behind jumping. Before we start analyzing Mario's sexy legs and their jumping power, we'll first use a simpler example to learn how jumping works. Let's say that I jump half a meter into the air. For me that's a pretty fucking impressive feat, but just how impressive is it really? I weigh a little less than 60 kilograms, but let's use just 60 kilograms for our calculations. We also know that the acceleration caused by gravity is a fixed value, equal to 9.81 meters per second squared. This means that every second, our velocity will decrease by 9.81 meters per second. The jump I performed started with a certain velocity, call it v0. Before we can do anything, we have to figure out what this velocity was. To do this, we'll use a few equations from physics. For our research, acceleration will always be a constant value. It will be -9.81 meters per second squared. If acceleration is a constant value and it itself is a derivative of velocity, this would mean that the velocity is like a straight line. If you plot it with respect to time, it's a straight line. Not a constant, but something like this. As an equation, you would write it in the form v equals a times t, with t being time, plus b. Next up, velocity is the derivative of the position x, so to express the position x, we need a quadratic equation of the form x equals at squared plus bt plus c. I'll spare you the headache for now, these are the equations we get. Let's begin by thinking about the top of my jump. It might not look like it in the footage, but when I am at my highest point, time seems to stretch and elongate, transforming the fleeting instant into an eternity of stillness. At the zenith of my jump, I am neither rising toward the heavens, nor descending to the earth. I am suspended in a delicate equilibrium, a perfect balance of forces. In this rarefied moment, all motion ceases, and I am enveloped in a sublime serenity. What I'm trying to fucking say is that my velocity is 0. Let's put that into the formula. From this equation, we can find that the time it takes me to reach the top of my jump is equal to t equals v0 divided by g. This is great, but it's completely useless if you don't have a goddamn clue what the starting velocity is. But we can use this new expression for t in the position formula. You see, when I am at the top of my jump and t equals that value, My position x is equal to the height of my jump, so the top height that I reach, which we will call h. We add that in, and then we substitute t for what we just found. We get this fucking monstrosity. Don't worry, we can simplify everything like this until we eventually get to our expression for the starting velocity. Isn't it satisfying how physics is really just playing with equations, slotting one into the other, and finding new ways to calculate values? Anyway, we can now calculate what my starting velocity was. For this example, we can calculate that to be 3.13 meters per second. Also notice how the mass is no longer present in this equation. So it doesn't matter how many times you go through the McDonald's drive-thru, because your starting velocity will remain the same if the height remains the same. We can also calculate the time that it took for me to reach the top height of 0.5 meters. This is known as the time of ascent. Remember when I said this equation was completely useless without knowing what the starting velocity was? Well, now we know that value, so we can calculate the time. In this case, that time would be 0.32 seconds. It took me 0.32 seconds from leaving the ground to reaching my top height. We can easily conclude from this that the push-off velocity directly determines the top height of your jump. A higher push-off velocity causes a higher jump, because it takes gravity longer to overthrow the higher speed and make the man go down again. During that longer time, you're able to jump higher. Next, let's look into jumping force, aka the upward force you gain by pushing off the ground when jumping. Let's quickly derive the impulse momentum theorem here. If you paid attention in class, you'll know that epic boy Newton taught us his second law like so. Just a bit ago I smacked your ass with a revision of basic secondary school physics, so you should still remember that acceleration is the derivative of velocity. We can rewrite the second law like this. Now, a lot of mathematicians, including probably your math teacher, would probably come to my house with a barrel gun if I proclaim that derivatives are actually just fractions, but in this case it works, so please save the guns for when I inevitably make a mistake further in the video. You know how fractions work, so we can rewrite the equation like this. And this is the impulse momentum theorem in its basic form. Why is it called that? Well, 90% of you probably don't give a flying shit, but for the 10% who do, and I really appreciate you, it's quite simple. Momentum is defined as mass times velocity. Impulse is defined as the change in momentum. So m times delta v is the same as delta m times v, or the change in momentum, otherwise known as the impulse. This means that f times delta t would be equal to impulse, which it is. This also leads straight to the fact that the impulse is actually just the integral of force over time. Okay, take a breather, because the math is over, for like 30 seconds. Look at our beautiful new equation. It contains 4 different values. So F is the force, so the jumping force. M is the mass, so my mass is 60 kilograms. Delta V is the change in velocity this force causes. So when you jump, your velocity goes from 0 to the starting velocity. So in this case, delta V is really just V0 in disguise. But what about delta T? It is the change in time, or just the time over which the force is applied. When we jump, we don't really think about time, but for professional athletes, it's a whole thing. The longer you push off the ground, the higher your starting velocity will be, and thus your jump will be. The average human takes about 0.2 seconds to push off the ground. From this formula, we can find a new expression for the starting velocity. Before, we proved this equation. If we rewrite this a bunch, we can find an expression for h, because at the end of the day, we want to find out the height of a jump when given some input values. Now replace v0 by the expression we found from the impulse momentum theorem to get the final formula. G is a constant, so the only values we need to know to figure out how high the jump is are the force, the push-off time t, and the mass of the jumper m. This new formula can also be mixed and matched however we like to find other values. I weigh 60 kilograms and I jumped 0.5 meters into the air. So a calculation using the average push-off time of 0.2 seconds shows me that the force I exerted is approximately 1017 newtons. Is this an impressive jump? Well, on average, humans can jump with about a force between 2 and 3 times their body weight. Yes, weight is a force, because weight is the force that you exert on the ground due to gravity. In my case, that weight would be equal to 60 times 9.81 or 588 newton. According to this average, I should be able to jump with a force between 1176 and 1764 newton. Conclusion, my jump was fucking shit. To summarize, we have found the following equations. We will use these to analyze Mario's jumps. As a quick side note, what we're doing here is completely neglecting the existence of air in the Mario universe. We're basically acting as if Mario was jumping inside of a vacuum. Otherwise, we'd have to take into account things like air resistance. Air resistance causes a drag force, which opposes motion through the air. So basically, when you're flying through the air, you're constantly having to push air molecules out of the way, and so they kind of oppose your motion. There are two reasons why we'll be ignoring that for now. First off, calculating drag force is a tough process, and it involves many metrics we do not possess, such as the cross-sectional area of Mario and its coefficient of drag in the air. Second, the actual influence of drag force on a human jumping is so small that it's almost negligible. Drag force is more important in the aviation industry, where a plane's trajectory, speed, fuel consumption, etc. are all linked to the drag force acted upon the vehicle. Mario games aren't exactly known to be consistent. In one game, Mario can jump 5 times his own height, and in another he can barely cover a 2-block gap. When it comes to how tall Mario is, there have been many debates. We don't have to make this a shitty game theory video though, because official Nintendo sources, according to the Mario wiki, put his height at about 155 centimeters or 1.55 meters. As for his weight, that's a different kind of worms. Some sources put him at 90 kilograms, but that would give him a BMI of 38. Mario would be severely obese, which I don't think makes sense for a fit guy like him. Most sources though put his weight at about 60 kilograms, giving him an average BMI of about 25. 25 being average is probably optimism on my part though, given that a third of the adults in the US alone are obese. Health problems aside, we now have a neat profile of our favorite plumber. For our calculations from before, the height doesn't really matter, but it does matter when we're looking at the game. If we know that Mario himself is 155 centimeters tall, we can use him as a reference for other objects in the game. This way we can also measure how high he jumps in real metric units. Not the imperial system because it's horseshit. So I booted up my definitely real copy of Super Mario Bros. For the NES and got to work measuring. Something that immediately became obvious in this classic game is that everything is locked to a grid. Mario is exactly the same height as 2 brick blocks. This means that 1 brick block, or in other words 1 tile in the SMB grid, is half of Mario's height. This means 77.5 centimeters in width and height for 1 block. Next I went to the end of level 1-1. There we can find a big staircase of brick blocks, perfect for testing our plumber's jump height. We need a proper system to find this height, so let's go over a few problems to tackle. First of all, Mario has a jumping animation, so if we go off of the position of his feet, we'll get a false value, since he moves his feet closer to his body while jumping. One thing we can use is the top of his hat, because the top of his hat does not move due to the animations. I also mentioned before that Mario is the same height as 2 brick blocks, which is correct, but there's a bit of an issue here. Mario is actually a few pixels on the floor when he is standing. This means that the top of his hat is also a few pixels lower than the top of 2 brick blocks. His height is the same as the 2 brick blocks, but they aren't aligned flush. So let's take a look. When Mario is at the top of his jump, the hat is in this position. Some calculations in my image editor tell me that this line is at 81% of the last brick's height. Below that are 5 full bricks. In other words, Mario has jumped 5.81 bricks high. But wait, that's not right, because as we mentioned, he actually starts a few pixels into the ground. This 5.81 would be the value if Mario started perfectly on the ground, but it will actually be more if we take this into account. When Mario is standing on the ground, the part of him that is inside of the floor covers an additional 6% of a brick's height. So Mario's total jump height here would be 5.87 bricks high. Since we know the height of 1 brick to be 77.5 centimeters, we now know that Mario's jump height in this game is approximately 455 centimeters, or about 4.5 meters. The current world record for the highest jump while standing, because keep in mind Mario can do this while standing, is 1.616 meters. Mario does almost 3 times that, with seemingly no effort at all. But just how impressive is this jump? In this chapter we're assuming that Mario is on Earth, which means the surface gravity g is still 9.81 meters per second squared. Using the first formula we found, we can find the necessary starting velocity for a jump of this magnitude. That would be 9.45 meters per second. That is 3 times as fast as my jump. Mario jumps off the ground with a starting velocity of 35 kilometers per hour. The average push-off speed for humans lies somewhere between 2 and 5 meters per second. But Mario is out here doubling the maximum. The Mario wiki says he's not actually a human being, but of some unknown species, and I'm starting to believe that now. Maybe Mario is secretly a kangaroo, because kangaroos have an average push-off speed between 8 and 10 meters per second. Next, we'll use the second equation to figure out just how much force Mario is having to generate to do these kinds of jumps. Of course, a longer push-off time might make this easier for him. The longer the push-off time, the smaller the force required. But even though Mario clearly isn't a normal human being, we won't be changing the average of 0.2 seconds. And if you're curious, kangaroos also average 0.15 to 0.2 seconds. Even Kangaroo Mario has the same values. If we crunch the numbers, Mario is exerting a force here of about 2,834 Newton. Before we put that into perspective with some everyday examples, let's compare it to the average we saw before. I told you that humans can jump with about a force up to 3 times their body weight. For Mario, this would be 3 times 60 kilograms times the surface gravity of 9.81. That gives us 1,766 Newton, not even close. Mario can jump with a force almost 5 times his body weight. Some of you might go to the gym, props to you if you do, and you may also lift weights every now and then. If Mario were to use this force to instead lift a barbell, he'd be able to lift almost 300 kilograms. This is of course purely for perspective, because then Mario would need to exert the force from the muscles in his arms, and not by pushing off the ground. This immense force also makes you question what materials the Mushroom Kingdom is made of. A force of nearly 3,000 Newton would easily shatter a tiled floor or crack a wooden plank. We've seen the plumber in all sorts of situations, and not all of them had precisely engineered infrastructure to withstand this much force. But Mario still jumped all over them and nothing fucking happened. Some of you in the back might be screaming right now, demanding me to redo my calculations, because maybe Mario games don't take place on Earth. Maybe the surface gravity is lower, like on the moon, which would cause the jumping to be easier. It would greatly reduce the required starting velocity and necessary force. Well, I'd like to accept that thought and give it a try. Let's say that Mario performs this jump on a different planet, so the entirety of Super Mario Bros. Takes place on a different rock in space. His mass is still 60 kilograms, he still jumps 4.55 meters high, and he still has a push-off speed of 0.2 seconds. Let's say he jumps like an average human with an average force of 1,200 Newton. If we use that same second equation again, this time to find the new surface gravity, we get a shocking value. The surface gravity on this fictional planet would be 1.76 meters per second squared. How is that possible? That's more than 5 times less than on Earth. Well, take a step back. Let's learn more about physics for a second. Newton also gave us a formula for the force caused by gravity. It looks like this. If we want to get the surface gravity out of this, we just have to think about his second law, and we get to the following. So the formula above seems to resemble the form F equals m times a. Of course, if we remove the m part, we are left with this, which will then be the part that equals the acceleration, so g. So this is what g is. In this formula, big G is the gravitational constant, a value that is uniform in the entire universe. Big M is the mass of the planet, and R is the radius of the planet. If we want to construct a planet for Mario to have his surface gravity of 1.76 on, we need to choose either the radius or the mass. Let's try both options. First, let's say that this planet has Earth's radius, which is approximately 6,371 times 10 to the power 3 meters. We can then calculate the mass of this planet that would make it have Mario's surface gravity. The planet would have a mass of 1.07 times 10 to the power of 24 kilograms. The mass of Earth is approximately 5.97 times 10 to the power of 24 kilograms. This means that our fictional planet with Earth's radius would weigh 5 times less than Earth to make Mario look like a human jumper. But we can also do it the other way around. Let's say his fictional planet weighs just as much as Earth, but the radius is different. We can use the same equation for this. This radius would be about 15,000 times 10 to the power of 3 meters. it would be 2.4 times smaller than Earth's radius. I hate to break it to you, but what we just did is completely fucking wrong. All the way back at the start of the video, I showed you this formula to calculate the time of ascent, the time it takes to reach the height of your jump. If we calculate v0 like we used to for Mario's jump on his new planet with a g of 1.76, we get a new starting speed. This time it is 4 meters per second, still better than almost every human, but way more realistic than 9.45 on Earth. So if we now calculate the time of ascent, we get 2.27 seconds. If this scenario were real, and Mario was actually jumping on his planet, it would take 2.27 seconds for him to reach the top of his jump. In total, the full jump would last nearly 5 seconds. I'm pretty sure that in Super Mario Bros, a jump does not last 5 seconds. And guess what? I'm right. By recording footage of the game, which runs at 60 FPS, with OBS also set at 60 FPS, we can determine the actual time of ascent to be 0.52 seconds. This is still quite a floaty jump, seeing as the jump that I did at the start of the video had a value of 0.32, but it's way better than 2.27 seconds. But wait, doesn't this mean that we can just calculate what the surface gravity is? Yeah, that's exactly right. Let us once again look at the kinematic equations, at the moment where Mario reaches the top of his height. This time we can express v0, which is now unknown since we don't know a g, as follows. If we substitute this into the first equation, we get this. So now, since we know the height of Mario's jump and the time of ascent, t here, we can figure out what the surface gravity is. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to present to you the surface gravity of the Mushroom Kingdom, 33.66 meters per second squared. Okay, that's a lot. It pretty much means that gravity here is 3 times as strong as it is on Earth. In our solar system, Jupiter, with a surface gravity of 24.79 meters per second squared, comes the closest. If we take a look at exoplanets, planets outside of the solar system, it seems like the planet Korat 7b comes the closest, with a surface gravity of 25.6 meters per second squared. Now that we know the real surface gravity in Super Mario Bros, we can retry our calculations from before to figure out how strong Mario really is. First is the starting velocity, using our first equation. With the accurate surface gravity of 33.66 meters per second squared, this comes out to 17.5 meters per second. That's even faster than the Earth version of Mario we calculated before. That of course makes sense, since the surface gravity is 3 times as strong here. Before, I compared this immense push-off speed with the speed of a kangaroo, but even kangaroos can't jump with that amount of speed. Not a single animal compares to Mario in the Mushroom Kingdom. Next, we calculate the exerted force, which I expect will also be even more now. We'll once again assume an average push-off speed of about 0.2 seconds. We now get a fucking wild force of 5,250 Newton. Remember when I compared that to Mario's weight? Yeah, he can now jump with a force 9 times his own weight. This is 3 times as much as a top human athlete can reach. At the gym, Mario would now be able to use this force to nearly lift a 550 kilogram barbell. How any floor at all in the Mushroom Kingdom can survive when this Italian asshole is jumping around is beyond my comprehension. The floor would literally crack and shatter during the 0.2 seconds of push-off time. Now that we've discussed Super Mario Bros, it's time to look at all the other games in the 2D Mario series. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels is a harder sequel to the original game that was released as Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. Unsurprisingly, it uses the same engine as Super Mario Bros. So at the end of level 1-1, there's also a large staircase, once again allowing me to measure Mario's jump height. Using the exact same technique, I compared screenshots from both games of when Mario was at the height of his jump. To my complete goddamn surprise, the Mario from The Lost Levels actually jumped a few pixels higher, so let's calculate it again. Mario jumps 5 brick blocks high and then approximately 95% of the last brick block, so 5.95 brick blocks. But still, Mario is inside of the ground for a few pixels when he's standing, so we have to take that into account. It's about 5% of a brick block height, so in total this means that Mario can jump exactly 6 brick blocks high here. Keep in mind that Mario is still the height of 2 brick blocks, so we can use Mario's height of 155 centimeters to find that his new jump reaches 465 centimeters. That is 10 centimeters higher than in Super Mario Bros. But it gets even crazier. I once again used my video footage recorded at the same FPS as the game to figure out what Mario's time of ascent was. Since Mario jumps higher here, I expected this time to be higher too, but I was very wrong. The time of ascent is exactly the same as in Super Mario Bros. So to recap, the time of ascent is the exact same, being 0.52 seconds, but the jump height is now 10 centimeters higher. You know what this also means? It means the surface gravity has changed. Returning to our old formula, we can figure out what this new value is. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, the surface gravity of the Mushroom Kingdom is equal to 34.39 meters per second squared. That is a small increase of 0.7 meters per second squared. Mario's push-off speed is now 17.88 meters per second, as opposed to 17.5 in Super Mario Bros. The force Mario exerts here is 5,365 Newton, as opposed to 5,250 Newton in Super Mario Bros. So far, it seems like Mario has gotten stronger since his last game. Will this trend continue? Super Mario Bros. 2 is up next. It's that weird game that looks half like a Mario game and half like a bootleg Japanese game with Mario textures plastered on it. There are two types of jumps in this game. Mario can perform both types of jumps as normal him, so they are both realistic standards for his power in game. Let's start with the normal jump we all know and love. I measured the time of ascent to be 0.42 seconds in this game. To find the jump height, I had a little bit more trouble. I was going to find another reference like the brick blocks, but I didn't find anything at all, and I didn't have time to play through the entire game. So instead, I took a screenshot of Mario on the ground, then took a screenshot of Mario at the height of his jump, made sure the camera hadn't moved, and then compared the pixel height of his jump while looking at the position of his cap. The pixel difference was 251 pixels. All I had to do now was find out how many pixels tall Mario was, and then do some quick maths with Mario's height we know to find the jump height in this game. It comes out to a perfect jump height of 3 meters. This is lower than in the previous titles, but also note that the time of ascent is lower, so it may compensate when calculating the surface gravity. If we calculate the surface gravity, we get a value of 31.01 meters per second squared. This is still incredibly unrealistic as a value in physics, but at least it's consistent with the two previous games. The push-off speed is 14.29 meters per second, which is a lot lower than before, due to the fact that the top height is lower, while the surface gravity remains pretty much the same. The exerted force here is 4,285 Newton, also logically lower than the previous games. So on the one hand, the force and push-off speed are slightly more realistic, but the surface gravity remains insanely high. But we're not done with this game. You see, if you press and hold the down button, Mario will start charging a super jump. When released, he'll jump even higher than before. This new jump has a time of ascent equal to 0.5 seconds and a height of exactly 5 meters. This means that we can try to calculate the surface gravity again. And holy fucking shit, it's a completely different value. The surface gravity is now 40 meters per second squared. Okay, we'll ignore the fact that Mario can change the planet's gravity for now and move on to calculating its push-off speed. This is now 20 meters per second, the highest we've ever seen. It makes sense, seeing as Mario does charge up his leap, but how strong is Mario in terms of force here? This is a tough question to answer. If we assume the push-off time is still 0.2 seconds, like average, Mario is exerting a force of 6,000 Newton, more than enough force to lift a fucking horse. Of course, this seems even more unrealistic, because it is. Mario is clearly charging up this jump, so his push-off time is way higher than 0.2 seconds. Now, in the game, we can see his sprite flickering while we hold down the down button. This can only mean one thing: Mario is pushing off the ground. So how long does this take? Well, it takes as long as you want, because you can just hold down the button for an infinite amount of time, then release it, and Mario will still jump 5 meters. So it might seem like we're screwed here, but wait just a minute. The flickering animation only begins after holding the button for a short time, 1.2 seconds to be precise. So the minimal push-off time Mario needs to perform this godlike jump is 1.2 seconds. Any time longer than that would result in less required force, so the maximum possible force that Mario can exert is the one where it takes exactly 1.2 seconds. We can calculate that to be exactly 1000 Newton. Huh, that's surprisingly normal? By any means, no human can charge a jump for 1.2 seconds and reach 5 meters high, on a planet with 4 times the Earth's atmosphere. But 1000 Newton is a low force for a jump. When I jumped half a meter into the air, I exerted a force of 1017 Newton. So when super jumping, it appears like Mario is as weak as I am. If only I could use my force to jump that high. Some of you might be doubting my methods here. Mario jumps higher, and my calculations use that to prove there is a different surface gravity present. What most people might assume is that Mario is just putting more force into his jump here, thus causing the higher leap. Let's assume for a second that this is correct. Using the formula for the force, we can figure this out. So we think logically and assume that the surface gravity is the same as the normal jumps, so 34.01 meters per second squared. We know Mario's mass, the height which is larger for the jar jump, and the higher push-off time of 1.2 seconds. That would give us a force of 922 Newton. Of course, Mario isn't putting more force in here because he charges for longer. If Mario were to perform this high jump with that same 0.2 seconds of push-off time, he'd be using 5532 newtons, as opposed to 4285 for a normal jump. This might seem more logical to you, because the surface gravity is the same, and all Mario does is exert more force to jump higher. But we run into a bit of a problem. Let's keep assuming that Mario can do this 5 meter jump with the normal jump's surface gravity. We know the height and a gravity, so we can easily figure out what the time of ascent would be. So that would make the calculation for time of ascent to be this. In the case of his 5 meter jump with normal jump surface gravity, the time of ascent would be 0.54 seconds. But from real measurements in game, we can tell the time of ascent is actually 0.5 seconds. Yes, I know it's a difference of 0.04 seconds, but for physics and surface gravity, that makes all the difference. From that 0.04 second difference, the surface gravity here jumps from 34 to 40. Super Mario Bros. 3. It is the last NES game on our list, so let's take a look. I first measured the time of ascent to be 0.52 seconds, which is exactly the same as in Super Mario Bros. And also the last levels. The jump height here is approximately 4.21 meters, so the time of ascent remains the same, while the top height is lower. This means we probably have a lower gravity. Sure enough, the surface gravity comes out to 31.14 meters per second squared, the lowest value we've seen so far. It's not a far stretch from the other values though, so the Mushroom Kingdom is staying consistent so far. The push-off velocity is 16.2 meters per second, and the exerted force is 4,858 Newton. But wait, Mario can become a fucking frog in this game. Ignore the fact that he's grey here, I definitely didn't use like a Game Genie code to get the frog suit early. Through measurements, we find a time of ascent equal to 0.52 seconds. And Frog Mario reaches a height of 4.69 meters. So his jump lasts the same amount of time as normal Mario, but he jumps much higher. This still counts as being Mario, since the game depicts and describes his form as just being a frog suit, meaning no strange magic or illegal proteins are involved. In this form, the surface gravity is set to 34.69 meters per second squared. We will talk more about how surface gravity can just change between Mario forms when we look into Super Mario Land 2. We also find a push-off speed of 18.04 meters per second and an exerted force of 5,411 Newton. Keep in mind that since this is canonically a suit, Mario's weight does not change. He just awkwardly crouches into a frog position on a cold floor. Oh, you thought I would just skip over this game because it has terrible physics? Hell no! For one, this game was my childhood. I played it over and over on my 3DS Virtual Console, and I remember how shitty the physics were, so I'm yearning to find out if this fucks up our numbers. Mario's time of ascent is 0.42 seconds, the same as in Super Mario Bros. 2. The jump height is a mere 3.11 meters. We're still assuming that Mario's height when he has eaten a super mushroom is 1.55 meters. With these numbers, we get a surface gravity of 35.26 meters per second squared. If we ignore the super jump from Super Mario Bros. 2, this is the strongest gravity we've seen so far. His push-off speed is a more realistic 14.8 meters per second, so it seems like certain values balance each other out. The exerted force here is 4,443 Newton, close to the other values we've gotten. I'm actually quite surprised by Super Mario Land, because anyone who's ever played this game knows that it's a pain in the ass to control, but besides the high surface gravity, nothing seems to set it apart from the previous Mario titles. I was expecting these gravities to wildly fluctuate between games, but that is yet to be the case. Moving on to a fan favorite, Super Mario World. The countless ROM hacks people have made of this game, and the sheer skill some casual players have shown, must mean this game has quite reliable physics. Let's delve in. Super Mario World also has two main types of jumps, normal jumps and spin jumps. They vary in their physics and jumping, so let's go over them separately and hope to fucking god they have the same surface gravity. I'm looking at you, Super Mario Bros. 2. For the normal jump, we find a time of ascent of 0.47 seconds and a jump height of 3.6 meters. This gives us a surface gravity of 32.6 meters per second squared. The push-off speed is 15.32 meters per second and the exerted force is 4,595 Newton. For the spin jump, we find a time of ascent of 0.42 seconds and a jump height of 3.05 meters. Both the time and the height are smaller, so maybe it will compensate for a similar surface gravity. Calculating this gives us 34.6 meters per second squared. It's still 2 meters per second squared higher than the normal jump, but at least it's not 6 meters per second squared difference like in Super Mario Bros. 2. The push-off speed is 14.52 meters per second, and the exerted force is 4,357 Newton. Super Mario Land 2 is the sequel to, you guessed it, Super Mario Land. This game is actually quite underrated in my opinion and much better than the original. The physics are also different, it's not just a carbon copy of the previous game. Mario's time of ascent is 0.38 seconds and he reaches a top height of 2.81 meters. This achieves two new records, that being the shortest jump in both duration and in height. Because of this ungodly combination, the surface gravity comes out to a whopping 38.92 meters per second squared, the largest one by far. Luckily, the push-off speed balances out to 14.79 meters per second, similar to many other games. The exerted force is 4,437 Newton, normal stuff. After Super Mario World, Nintendo waited like 14 years to make another 2D Mario game, so here's New Super Mario Bros. The newer games are obviously more complex, so there are way more cool moves for Mario to perform here. Mario can now triple jump, wall jump, etc, and while these would definitely be cool to analyze physically, they do not count for the purpose of this video. We are looking at standing jumps, and it's easier to jump higher with a running start. This is because your legs use some of the horizontal momentum to reach a higher altitude when jumping, so no triple jumps. I also know that Mario jumps higher if he runs and jumps, but that also doesn't count here. Technically, a standing jump should make Mario use all the force he has, because there's no horizontal movement or previous momentum in triple jumps to go off of. Maybe we'll look into them in a future video. Anyways, this is also the first game where power-ups can affect Mario's jump height. It's also where we run into another issue. Take a look at Mini Mario for example. This little guy has a floaty jump. He jumps for longer, higher, and it kinda just feels like you're jumping in low gravity, like on the moon. The game itself explains this by saying that Mario is much lighter in this form, altering the path of his jumps. This explanation is believable since our intuition tells us that lighter objects would be able to jump that way, but have you actually seen that happen? Sure, heavy objects fall faster than light objects outside of a vacuum, but have you ever seen a feather jump? Of course you fucking haven't. The game's explanation of this relies on the existence of drag force in the coding of the game. But any good programmer knows that Nintendo did not code actual drag force into New Super Mario Bros. What they most likely did do to make Mini Mario jump that way is just modify the game's surface gravity in the code. For Mini Mario to jump like this, the surface gravity would have to be lower, like on the moon. This conclusion sheds a clear light on why differences in surface gravity inside of the same game, or the same universe for that matter, aren't mistakes. If you play 5 different Mario games, you probably won't be able to properly rank them based on their surface gravity. Just by looking at a jump, you will not be able to tell if the surface gravity is higher or lower. It's just a number and it's changed even throughout the game, to achieve certain effects and experiences for the player. This video isn't meant to be a call for Nintendo to start using a uniform surface gravity in every Mario game, because nobody cares, it's just a game. But it's still fun to analyze the shit out of them and learn more about real physics along the way, so let's keep going. Regular Mario has a time of ascent of 0.45 seconds and a jump height of 3.36 meters. This gives us a surface gravity of 33.19 meters per second squared. The push-off speed is 14.93 meters per second, and the exerted force is 4,480 Newton. So far, everything is comparable to the other games. Mini Mario's jumps are up next. Many of you would expect these jumps to be way higher, right? You'd be partially right. The jumps are higher here, but only by a tiny margin. You see, Mini Mario has a floaty jump. As we will most likely see in a moment, the surface gravity is altered to be much lower while using this power-up. If you play a game like this, it feels like you jump higher because of two reasons. First off, your air time is a lot longer. It takes much longer to reach that top height. And second, the player is now much smaller. We tend to judge the height of a jump by how tall the jumper is. If normal Mario jumps 3 meters high, and Mini Mario also jumps 3 meters high, we would mark Mini Mario's jump as the highest one, because our brains measure jump height in amounts of the jumper's height. So Mini Mario does jump higher if the unit we measure in is amount of Mini Marios. He jumps like his own body height many more times than regular Mario does, giving us the impression of a higher jump in total. Good, but what about the raw numbers? Mini Mario's time of ascent is 0.72 seconds, as opposed to 0.45 for normal Mario. His jump height, 3.47 meters as opposed to 3.36 meters. And guess what? That gives us a surface gravity of 13.39 meters per second squared. That's really small for a Mario game, so it's truly like we're on the moon. It's actually quite close to Earth's gravity at this point. Mini Mario also needs a much smaller push-off speed because of this, that being 9.64 meters per second. But now, we get to the hardest part, calculating the force. This part requires an input from Mini Mario's mass. How much does Mini Mario weigh? Well, one thing we can be certain of is that when Mario is scaled down, his density remains the same. This also means that when he is scaled down and his volume decreases, his mass will also have to decrease for the density to stay the same. But by how much? Well, we can once again use pixel measuring to find out by what scaling factor Mario's height has changed here. If we find out that the height has, for example, halved, this would mean that we need to apply that scaling to every dimension of Mario's 3D body. This means that the total volume would be scaled down by a factor of 1 over 2 to the power of 3. In other words, Mario at half his height would have an eighth of his normal volume. Since density would be constant, this would also mean that his mass reduced to an eighth. In-game, we can measure a scaling factor of 0.39. Taking this to the power of 3, we get 0.057. Multiply that by his normal mass of 60 kilograms, and we get a new mass of 3.44 kilograms for Mini Mario. This sounds surprisingly realistic. So let's calculate the exerted force now. It's a measly 166 Newton, meaning Mini Mario probably lost a lot more muscle weight than fat when scaling down. We can apply the same logic for Mega Mario. This is the opposite of Mini Mario, a scaled up version of the Italian war criminal. His time of ascent is 0.42 seconds, so a shorter time, but his jump height is now 5.85 meters. Once again, we would never think this jump is that high, because if we measure this jump in the amount of time he jumped his own height, we'd be quite disappointed. It doesn't look that high, because we're dealing with a gigantic version of Mario. But in pure measurements, this is a huge jump. As you would expect, the gravity here is not lower, but much higher. That's now a surface gravity of 66.33 meters per second squared. The push-off speed is also higher, 27.86 meters per second. We can also find the scaling factor here, which is 3.53, cube that to 43.99, multiply by the normal mass to get Mega Mario's mega mass of 2,639 kilograms. In this mode, the absolute beast pumps a force of 367,585 Newton. With that force, Mega Mario could theoretically lift 7 adult elephants. What a champ. The next 2D game on our list is New Super Mario Bros. Wii. It also has a mini mushroom, but no Mega Mushroom. Regular Mario's time of ascent is 0.47 seconds, and he reaches a height of about 3.27 meters. That makes a surface gravity of 29.61 meters per second squared. That's the lowest gravity we've seen so far for normal Mario. It gives him a push-off speed of 13.91 meters per second and an exerted force of 4,172 Newton. Mini Mario is up next, and he seems to share the changes from New Super Mario Bros. He has a time of ascent of 0.73 seconds and a jump height of 3.62 meters. This gives us a low gravity of 13.59 meters per second squared. That's actually incredibly close to the other Mini Mario at 13.39 meters per second squared. His push-off speed here is also a smaller 9.92 meters per second. A bit of measuring of pixels gives us a scaling factor of 0.42, cubed to 0.074, giving us a Mini Mario mass of 4.45 kilograms, and that allows us to find his force of 221 Newton. We're now reaching the point where Nintendo started to churn out 2D Mario games like it was nobody's business. New Super Mario Bros. 2, ironically the third game in the new Soup series, once again contains a Mini Mushroom and a Mega Mushroom for us to test. As for normal Mario, there is nothing special here. He reaches a top height of 3.12 meters in 0.47 seconds. It's among his lowest jumps, but I suppose even Mario has a bad day now and then. The resulting surface gravity is 28.25 meters per second squared. Mario jumps with a push-off speed of 13.28 meters per second and a force of 3,983 Newton. Mini Mario, meanwhile, reaches a height of 3.60 meters in about 1.02 seconds. This is by far the longest jump in any Mario game so far. It probably won't surprise anyone that the surface gravity is fucking minimal. It's 6.92 meters per second squared. Hold on, that's lower than Earth's gravity of 9.81. It's wild, but it will probably get even wilder when we know the mass of this small guy. Through height measurements, we find a scaling factor of 0.38, cubed to 0.056, and multiplied by the normal 60 kilograms to find a mass of 3.36 kilograms for Mini Mario. With this additional information, we can find a push-off speed of 7.06 meters per second and a force of 119 Newton. Now is maybe a good time to put these tiny forces for Mini Mario into perspective. A smaller force doesn't actually mean that Mario becomes equally weaker. It just has to do with his smaller mass. If Mario weighs 60 kilograms and he exerts a force of 3,983 Newton, we can express that force in the factors of his own body weight. 60 kilograms times 9.81 gives us a body weight of 589 Newton, meaning this Mario can exert a force of 6.77 times his body weight. If we do the same thing for Mini Mario, with his smaller mass and smaller exerted force, we get a force of 3.60 times his body weight. So comparing 6.77 times 3.60, we can't deny that Mini Mario is weaker, but he's not that much weaker. The difference in raw exerted force is huge, but related to body weights, it's less than half of what he normally puts out. You just can't expect a guy weighing 3.36 kilograms to exert 4,000 Newton with ease. For Mega Mario, we can use these same techniques. He reaches a top height of 5.32 meters in 0.42 seconds. The surface gravity becomes a big 60.32 meters per second squared, and he has a push-off speed of 25.33 meters per second. For his mass, we can use the scaling factor to find 2,641 kilograms. That gives us a force of 334,534 Newton. Nintendo tried to revive the 2D Mario series one last time, but at this point it was pretty much hooked up to life support, with no recovery in sight. Alas, let's do some measuring, shall we? There's also a Mini Mario here, but no Mega Mario. Normal Mario can reach a top height of 3.50 meters in about 0.43 seconds. This is once again a pretty low jump compared to previous titles. It gives us a surface gravity of 34.07 meters per second squared, a push-off speed of 14.65 meters per second, and an exerted force of 4,395 Newton. For Mini Mario, we find a time of ascent equal to 0.75 seconds. That gives him a top height of 3.73 meters, with a resulting surface gravity of 13.26 meters per second squared. Before we calculate his mass, we can also find a push-off speed of 9.95 meters per second. For his mass, we once again need to find the scaling factor. That's 0.41 cubed to 0.071 multiplied by his normal mass to get 4.25 kilograms. With that mass, Mini Mario exerts a force of 211 Newton when jumping. Alright, here's a game you probably didn't expect me to include, Super Mario Maker. I'm bundling the two games together here and going off of two since their engines are pretty much the same and I can only record jumping footage on my Nintendo Switch. I found posts online suggesting that the entire game uses one single physics engine for every game style, so let's put that to the test. I first measured the jumps of every regular Mario in every game style. Despite me thinking my measurement system sucked ass, I actually just got the exact same time of ascent in every game, 0.45 seconds. So at this point I thought all would be swell, everything would be exactly the same. But it wasn't, all the jump heights were fucking different, at least when I measured them for Mario's height. Here's the results that I got. So these are the resulting surface gravities, push-off speeds, and exerted forces. We can now use this to compare the surface gravities of these different game styles to the surface gravities in the actual games. So for Super Mario Bros, it has an original surface gravity of 33.66 meters per second squared, while the Maker version is at 31.21 meters per second squared. For Super Mario Bros. 3, we have an original gravity of 31.14 meters per second squared and a new one of 38.72 meters per second squared. For Super Mario World, the original was 32.59 meters per second squared and now it is 38.02 meters per second squared in the Maker game. And finally, for New Super Mario Bros. U, we had a surface gravity of 34.07 meters per second squared, and in the Maker game, it's 31.80 meters per second squared. There doesn't seem to be a pattern here. Some surface gravities are lower, some are higher, and all with different factors. We're almost done with Super Mario Maker, because there's still a few power-ups to discuss. In the Super Mario Bros. Game style, there is a big mushroom, so let's measure this one too. The time of ascent is once again 0.45 seconds, and the height is 3.16 meters here. This means it's exactly the same as normal Mario in this game style. I even tried to find the mass of this new Mario, but his height is also the same, so I don't think it changes at all. Why is this one able to break blocks with jump force then? Well, he is wider, so he has a bigger contact area with the blocks beneath him. Perhaps this has some physical effect on the easier destruction of bricks due to a spread out pressure. The Super Mario Bros. Game style also has a mushroom to put Mario into Super Mario Bros. 2 mode. Isn't that fantastic? This Mario has a time of ascent of 0.47 seconds and a top height of 3.88 meters. This gives him a surface gravity of 35.13 meters per second squared, a push-off speed of 16.51 meters per second, and an exerted force of 4,953 Newton. In the Super Mario Bros. 3 game style, we can also go into frog mode. In 0.55 seconds, this frog fella reaches a height of 5.51 meters. That makes a surface gravity of 36.43 meters per second squared, a push-off speed of 20.04 meters per second, and an exerted force of 6,011 Newton. Remember that Mario's mass is still 60 kilograms here. In Super Mario World, there are no special power-ups to measure. The same goes for New Super Mario Bros. U, because there's no mini mushroom in it. And in the Super Mario 3D World game style, every power-up has the same physics. I tested it. The final game on our list is the most recent entry in the series. This fresh game is of course Super Mario Bros. Wonder. There are only two power-ups we'll be discussing here, Normal Mario and Elephant Mario. Yes, I am fully aware that there's like 30 fucking badges you can apply, but that doesn't fucking count. You see this little motherfucker, this little caterpillar dude? He controls the badges, and God knows what shit this guy pumps into Mario's veins to give him these superpowers. It's not natural Mario, so it doesn't count. And yes, Elephant Mario is natural Mario, he just be like that sometimes. All I'm saying is that the caterpillar guy is a magician, Elephant Mario is just an elephant. For regular Mario, we find that he reaches a top height of 3.20 meters in 0.47 seconds. This gives the game a surface gravity of 28.97 meters per second squared. The push-off speed is 13.62 meters per second, and the exerted force is 4,085 Newton. For Elephant Mario, I measured a top height of 3.19 meters and a time of ascent equal to 0.48 seconds. Wait a minute, given the fact that my measurements aren't perfect, this can only mean one thing. Mario and Elephant Mario are jumping the same way. There's no way. Mario game is finally realistic. Or is it? We know for a fact that Elephant Mario weighs more than regular Mario. In a vacuum, their mass does indeed not matter, and this equal result would make total sense. But we know the game doesn't take place in a vacuum, we're just calculating that way. So it's actually not realistic at all. What we can do with this new information is find a different exerted force for the elephant power-up. But what is Elephant Mario's mass? Well, we can't know. But here's how I calculated it anyway. Let's assume that Mario is an African elephant with an average weight of 5,453 kilograms. Logically, this isn't our final mass, since an African elephant is way fucking bigger. So how much smaller is an Elephant Mario? Elephant Mario is 2.45 meters tall. The average African elephant is 3.20 meters tall. That gives us a scaling factor of 0.77 cubed to 0.45 multiplied by the average African elephant mass to get 2,443 kilograms of mass for Elephant Mario. With this new information, we can find a massive jump force 166,325 Newton. Now that we've covered every 2D Mario game, it's time to look into a couple of statistics. For our conclusion, we will only be looking at the regular forms of Mario in every game. The highest surface gravity in any 2D Mario game goes to Super Mario Land 2, with 38.92 meters per second squared. That's 4 times the Earth's gravitational pull. The lowest, and thus most realistic gravity in any 2D Mario game goes to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, with 28.97 meters per second squared. That's 3 times the Earth's gravitational pull. We find Mario's highest jump in his second game, Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. He jumps a height of 4.65 meters in that game. That's the height of a full 1-story house. Mario could technically jump onto my roof if he wanted. The lowest jump can be found in Super Mario Land 2, which makes sense as it also has the highest surface gravity. Mario can only reach 2.81 meters here. That's still much higher than the highest human standing jump of 1.70 meters though. The strongest Mario, so the Mario outputting the most force, is Mario from the Lost Levels. He outputs an insane 5,365 newtons of force. The weakest Mario, so the Mario outputting the least amount of force with 3,983 newtons, is New Super Mario Bros. 2. With all this data, we can figure out what the average Mario's profile is. How do we go about doing that? Well, we need to use our force equation for this. We already know what Mario's mass is, it's 60 kilograms. We also use the default push-off time of 0.2 seconds. So what we'll do is we'll find the average jump force Mario has, and also the average surface gravity for all the games. Then we can input all of these numbers to figure out the average jump height. Then we can make up the average profile. We aren't just going to calculate the average height from the height data we gathered, because that's not representative due to different jump times, surface gravities, forces, etc. I crunched the numbers. The average force is 4,586 Newton. The average surface gravity, 33.66 meters per second squared. With that, the average jump height for Mario is equal to 3.47 meters. That gives him an average push-off speed of 15.29 meters per second. The average time of ascent is equal to 0.45 seconds. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay safe.